It was a trip meant for exploration and self-discovery. Elisa Lam, a 21-year-old university student from Vancouver, had set out on a solo adventure to Los Angeles in early 2013. The city of dreams, full of opportunity, excitement, and life. Elisa had long dreamed of exploring the streets of LA, blogging her experiences along the way, and embracing the freedom of a journey on her own. But what was supposed to be an exciting escape would soon turn into a mystery that still haunts us today. Let us know where you are watching and listening from. Subscribe. On January 26th, Elisa checked into the Cecil Hotel, an infamous and historic hotel in downtown Los Angeles. The hotel itself carried a long and dark history, with rumors of strange happenings, deaths, and eerie connections to the city's criminal underworld. But for Elisa, it was just another stop on her journey, a temporary place to rest as she wandered through the unfamiliar streets. Days passed, and Elisa kept in touch with her family, sending them messages and sharing updates on her travels. But on January 31st, everything changed. Elisa went missing. She had been staying in a shared room in the hotel's hostel, but when staff came to check on her, she was nowhere to be found. The rooms were searched, her belongings remained untouched, and yet there was no sign of Elisa. She had disappeared as if she had vanished into thin air. The search for Elisa began almost immediately. The Los Angeles Police Department scoured the hotel, the nearby streets, and the surrounding areas. Her family was frantic, not knowing where their daughter had gone, or what could have happened to her. But for days there were no clues, no evidence, no signs that could explain her disappearance. The search continued, but hope seemed to fade with each passing day. That was until a glimmer of hope emerged: surveillance footage. It showed Elisa in the hotel's elevator, acting strangely, pressing multiple buttons, stepping in and out of the elevator, her movements erratic. She seemed to be talking to someone, but no one was there. Her behavior was unsettling, and it sent a wave of confusion and concern rippling through investigators. What was she running from? Was someone with her, or was it all in her mind? Was this a simple case of mental distress, or was there something more sinister at play? As the days passed, the footage went viral. The strange, eerie nature of the video captivated people around the world, each trying to make sense of what they were seeing. But the more they watched, the more questions arose. Who was Elisa really talking to in that elevator? What happened to her in the hours that followed? And then, on February 19, 2013, nearly 3 weeks after Elisa Lam's disappearance, a discovery would be made that would change everything. Elisa's body was found, starkly, disturbingly, inside a water tank on the hotel's roof. How did she get there? What happened in the moments leading up to her death? Was this a tragic accident, or was something darker at play? To this day, the mystery remains. Theories abound, speculations run wild, but the truth, the full story, has never been fully revealed. Tonight, we'll dive into the eerie circumstances surrounding Elisa Lam's tragic death, a case filled with confusion, unanswered questions, and an unsettling sense of the unknown. Stay with us as we explore the strange, unsettling story of Elisa Lam, a young woman whose life and death became a mystery that has yet to be solved. Elisa Lam was a young woman full of life and promise. Born on April 30, 1991, in Vancouver, Canada, Elisa was the eldest daughter of immigrant parents from Hong Kong. She had a deep passion for writing and a strong desire to experience the world. Elisa was known for her adventurous spirit, one that extended into her love for travel and exploration. It was through her blog, Ether Fields, that Elisa shared pieces of her life, her thoughts, and her experiences as she ventured beyond the borders of her hometown. Elisa's blog served as a window into her soul, offering glimpses of her daily life, reflections on her mental health struggles, and the challenges of being a young woman in an often overwhelming world. Through her writing, she sought to understand herself better, capturing the ups and downs of her emotional journey. Elisa was open about her battles with depression, and her writing provided a way for her to process and share her emotions with her readers, some of whom never met her but connected deeply with her words. At 21, Elisa made the decision to take a break from her studies at the University of British Columbia and go on a solo trip to Los Angeles. For many, traveling solo is an empowering experience, and Elisa, eager to embrace the freedom of a new environment, saw it as an opportunity to recharge and see life from a new perspective. She arrived in LA on January 26, 2013, staying at the infamous Cecil Hotel, a place that would eventually become forever associated with her mysterious disappearance. Before arriving in Los Angeles, Elisa had carefully planned her trip, and she excitedly shared her experiences with her family and friends. Her mother, who remained in regular contact with her, had no reason to believe anything was wrong. Elisa sent updates on her travels, including pictures of places she visited and the sights she encountered, and it seemed like she was enjoying her time in the city. To those around her, Elisa appeared to be a young woman on a much-needed escape, eager to discover more about herself and the world around her. While in LA, Elisa stayed at the Cecil Hotel's hotel hostel section, which is said to have been less expensive than other accommodations. The hotel, however, had a reputation. It was known for being a place of both historical significance and unsettling past events. Located in downtown Los Angeles, the Cecil had been linked to multiple tragic incidents and deaths. It was not just a hotel, it was a place with a dark, haunting history, including connections to notorious figures like serial killers and mysterious deaths. Despite the hotel's ominous reputation, Elisa didn't seem to be affected. She continued to visit local attractions, take in the sights, and explore LA at her own pace. However, she started to act strangely in the days leading up to her disappearance. Friends and family who heard from her during the trip noted that she had mentioned feeling uneasy at times. It was during this period that she began showing signs of distress, something that would only add layers to the mystery surrounding her fate. Elisa's trip was supposed to be a brief escape, a chance to experience life outside the confines of her studies, to breathe and see the world. She was a young woman trying to find herself, to make sense of her own struggles, and to embrace what life had to offer. But no one could have anticipated the tragic turn her journey would take, a journey that would end in a way no one could have foreseen. A journey that would leave unanswered questions, lingering doubts, and a mystery that would captivate the world. On January 31, 2013, Elisa Lam vanished without a trace, leaving behind only confusion and unanswered questions. What began as a solo adventure in the bustling streets of Los Angeles quickly turned into one of the most puzzling disappearances in modern history. At the time, Elisa had been staying at the Cecil Hotel, located in downtown Los Angeles. This wasn't just any hotel, it was a place with a dark history, linked to numerous tragic events over the years. Despite the hotel's unsettling reputation, Elisa seemed content with her choice of accommodation. She had been exploring the city on her own, visiting landmarks, museums, and taking in the vibrant energy of Los Angeles. There was no indication that anything was wrong. She had stayed in contact with her family and friends, sending text messages, sharing photos of her adventures, and writing blog posts. For all intents and purposes, Elisa was enjoying her solo trip. However, everything changed on January 31st, when Elisa was last seen by hotel staff. That evening, Elisa was supposed to meet a fellow guest, a man named Ben, who had reached out to her about possibly showing her around the city. But Elisa never showed up. The staff at the hotel started to become concerned. Her room was checked, but she was nowhere to be found. Her belongings remained in the room, her laptop, her phone, and even her bag, none of which had been touched. It seemed like she had simply vanished. The following day, Elisa was reported missing. Her family, who had been in regular contact with her, were alarmed when they didn't hear from her. They knew something wasn't right. With no signs of forced entry, no notes, and no indication of where she had gone, the police began investigating her disappearance. But no leads came up. No one had seen her leave the hotel, and no one knew where she had gone. The case seemed like it could be a simple missing person case, until the strange and unsettling clues began to surface. Several days passed, and still, there were no answers. Hotel staff were questioned, as well as fellow guests, but no one could provide anything substantial. However, the police would soon receive a lead that would change the course of the investigation: security footage from the hotel's elevator. As the footage was reviewed, investigators were stunned. In the grainy, black and white video, Elisa was seen entering the elevator at the Cecil Hotel. She pressed several buttons and stepped in and out of the elevator, but the most disturbing part of the footage was her strange behavior. Elisa appeared to be talking to someone, though no one was visible. She acted erratically, looking around nervously, moving in and out of the elevator as though she was trying to escape from something, or someone. She seemed to be hiding, or perhaps, interacting with an unseen presence. Investigators were baffled. The video was unlike anything they had ever seen. Was Elisa in distress? Was she experiencing a mental health crisis, or was there something more sinister at play? The eerie footage sparked widespread media attention, and viewers around the world began to speculate on what had really happened to Elisa. Was she being followed? Was she suffering from a psychological episode? Or was there something more mysterious at play? As the footage spread online, the mystery deepened. And yet, despite the many theories, Elisa Lam was nowhere to be found. The questions surrounding her disappearance multiplied. Why was she acting so strangely? Who was she speaking to in the elevator? And most chilling of all, where did she go after the footage ended? On January 31, 2013, Elisa Lam vanished without a trace, leaving behind only confusion and unanswered questions. What began as a solo adventure in the bustling streets of Los Angeles quickly turned into one of the most puzzling disappearances in modern history. At the time, Elisa had been staying at the Cecil Hotel, located in downtown Los Angeles. This wasn't just any hotel, it was a place with a dark history, linked to numerous tragic events over the years. Despite the hotel's unsettling reputation, Elisa seemed content with her choice of accommodation. She had been exploring the city on her own, visiting landmarks, museums, and taking in the vibrant energy of Los Angeles. There was no indication that anything was wrong. She had stayed in contact with her family and friends, sending text messages, sharing photos of her adventures, and writing blog posts. For all intents and purposes, Elisa was enjoying her solo trip. However, everything changed on January 31st, when Elisa was last seen by hotel staff. That evening, Elisa was supposed to meet a fellow guest, a man named Ben, who had reached out to her about possibly showing her around the city. But Elisa never showed up. The staff at the hotel started to become concerned. Her room was checked, but she was nowhere to be found. Her belongings remained in the room, her laptop, her phone, and even her bag, none of which had been touched. It seemed like she had simply vanished. The following day, Elisa was reported missing. Her family, who had been in regular contact with her, were alarmed when they didn't hear from her. They knew something wasn't right. With no signs of forced entry, no notes, and no indication of where she had gone, the police began investigating her disappearance. But no leads came up. No one had seen her leave the hotel, and no one knew where she had gone. The case seemed like it could be a simple missing person case, until the strange and unsettling clues began to surface. Several days passed, and still, there were no answers. Hotel staff were questioned, as well as fellow guests, but no one could provide anything substantial. However, the police would soon receive a lead that would change the course of the investigation: security footage from the hotel's elevator. As the footage was reviewed, investigators were stunned. In the grainy, black and white video, Elisa was seen entering the elevator at the Cecil Hotel. She pressed several buttons and stepped in and out of the elevator, but the most disturbing part of the footage was her strange behavior. Elisa appeared to be talking to someone, though no one was visible. She acted erratically, looking around nervously, moving in and out of the elevator as though she was trying to escape from something, or someone. She seemed to be hiding, or perhaps, interacting with an unseen presence. Investigators were baffled. The video was unlike anything they had ever seen. Was Elisa in distress? Was she experiencing a mental health crisis, or was there something more sinister at play? The eerie footage sparked widespread media attention, and viewers around the world began to speculate on what had really happened to Elisa. Was she being followed? Was she suffering from a psychological episode? Or was there something more mysterious at play? As the footage spread online, the mystery deepened. And yet, despite the many theories, Elisa Lam was nowhere to be found. The questions surrounding her disappearance multiplied. Why was she acting so strangely? Who was she speaking to in the elevator? And most chilling of all, where did she go after the footage ended? The discovery of Elisa Lam's body in the water tank at the Cecil Hotel only deepened the mystery surrounding her disappearance. While the coroner's report ruled her death as accidental drowning, it left an unsettling number of questions unanswered. Over time, numerous theories began to surface, each one attempting to explain the strange circumstances leading up to her death. Some believed Elisa's death was the result of mental health issues, while others thought something far more sinister might have been at play. The mystery continues to intrigue and unsettle, leaving us to wonder what really happened to Elisa Lam. One of the first and most widely discussed theories was that Elisa's death was a tragic result of mental health struggles. Elisa had openly discussed her battles with depression and her prescribed medication, which some believed could have contributed to her erratic behavior in the elevator video. In the footage, she appears to be talking to an unseen presence, moving in and out of the elevator, pressing multiple buttons, and acting unusually agitated. Could she have been experiencing a psychotic episode? Was she hallucinating? Some people speculated that Elisa's medication, combined with the stress of traveling alone, led to a mental health crisis. The theory suggested that Elisa, in her disturbed state, wandered to the roof and somehow fell into the water tank, a tragic accident brought on by her inner turmoil. Yet, as plausible as this theory seemed, it didn't account for the more disturbing aspects of her death. How did she manage to get onto the roof? The rooftop was locked, and only hotel staff had access. Elisa was alone, and no one had seen her leave the hotel or enter the rooftop. This discrepancy led some to believe that Elisa's death was not an accident at all. Could it have been murder? Was someone else involved? The idea of foul play gained traction when it was revealed that Elisa had been staying in a hostel-style room in the hotel, surrounded by other guests. Could someone have followed her, or worse, harmed her? Another theory suggested that Elisa's death was tied to the hotel's dark and sinister history. The Cecil Hotel has long been associated with tragedy, violence, and death. Over the years, it has been linked to several notorious figures, including serial killers like Richard Ramirez, and other bizarre occurrences. Some people speculated that the hotel's dark energy might have played a role in Elisa's strange behavior. Was she somehow influenced by the hotel's tragic past? Some even went so far as to suggest that the hotel itself was cursed, with Elisa's death merely another chapter in its chilling legacy. This theory was more fantastical, but it was fueled by the unsettling atmosphere surrounding the hotel and Elisa's strange behavior in the elevator. The elevator video also sparked a great deal of speculation about Elisa's interaction with an unseen person. Some viewers believed she was being followed, or perhaps someone was hiding in the elevator with her. The video cuts off abruptly, leaving the mystery unresolved. Theories about an unseen stalker or even a hotel staff member involved in her death began to circulate. Was Elisa talking to someone who was lurking in the background? Was she being chased or confronted by someone in the hotel? The lack of answers to these questions only fueled the rumors. Finally, there's the theory of Elisa's death being tied to something much darker than we can imagine. Some believe she may have fallen victim to a larger conspiracy, perhaps even something involving the hotel's management or other guests. Could her death have been orchestrated by someone else, and if so, why? This theory, although highly speculative, has captured the imagination of many who still feel that the case remains unresolved. Despite the numerous theories, one thing remains certain: the full story of Elisa Lam's death remains a mystery. Whether it was a tragic accident, a mental health episode, or something far more sinister, the unanswered questions continue to haunt those who follow her story. We may never know what truly happened to Elisa, but her death has left an indelible mark on the Cecil Hotel and the public consciousness, one that remains shrouded in mystery. Nearly a decade has passed since Elisa Lam's tragic death, and yet, the questions surrounding her mysterious disappearance and final moments remain unanswered. The eerie footage, the unexplained circumstances, and the haunting discovery of her body in the water tank have left us grappling with more uncertainty than clarity. What truly happened to Elisa Lam, and why did her life end so suddenly? While answers remain elusive, her story continues to captivate the world and serve as a poignant reminder of the complexities of the human experience. The case of Elisa Lam is one that lingers in the public's collective mind. Despite the official ruling of accidental drowning, the mystery of how she ended up in that water tank continues to provoke speculation. The strange and unsettling behavior seen in the elevator footage, the lack of conclusive evidence, and the bizarre nature of the discovery, all of these elements have fed into the endless theories and discussions about Elisa's fate. Was it a tragic accident caused by mental health issues, or something more sinister? Could Elisa have been the victim of foul play? Or was her death simply an unfortunate series of events that led to her untimely demise? Despite the charred remains of what once had been their family home, George continued to dig, desperate to find even the smallest clue that could explain what had happened. But each search came up empty. There was no trace of his children, and no new evidence that could suggest what had happened after the fire started. Despite the lack of tangible proof, George and Jenny were undeterred. They expanded their search, reaching out to the police, hiring private investigators, and speaking with anyone who might have seen something that could shed light on the mystery. The family quickly realized that this wasn't just a local issue. It was a case that needed national attention. So, they turned to the public for help. One of their first efforts was to put up a large billboard along Route 16 in Fayetteville, featuring photographs of their 5 missing children. The billboard was simple but striking, featuring clear images of the children and a message asking anyone with information to come forward. It was a desperate move, but one that brought the case back into the public eye. For George and Jenny, the billboard was more than just a plea for help. It was a symbol of their refusal to give up on their children. The large, prominent display of their children's faces became a constant reminder to the community that these children were still missing, and that their family was still searching for them. As months turned to years, the public's interest in the case began to grow. Many people were captivated by the mystery surrounding the Sada children's disappearance. It wasn't just a case of a house burning down, it was a story of a family's heartbreaking loss, a story filled with unanswered questions and eerie clues. Over time, the mystery deepened, and people from across the country began to offer their theories and their support. Some of the tips they received were odd, while others were chilling. People claimed to have seen the children after the fire, in various towns across the state, or even further away. These reports were often contradictory and difficult to verify, but for George and Jenny, they kept their hope alive. The most compelling theory was that the children had been kidnapped before the fire, and that the blaze had been set as a cover-up. Could someone have taken the children, knowing that the fire would destroy any evidence of their abduction? It was a theory that made sense to the Sodders, and one they couldn't ignore. In addition to the tips and the theories, the Sodders received strange phone calls and letters over the years. Some of these were cryptic, suggesting that the children had been taken for reasons unknown, while others seemed to be taunting the family, offering vague hints and then disappearing into the ether. These calls and letters were often unsettling, but they only fueled the Sodder family's determination to uncover the truth. They believed the children were alive, and they would not stop until they found them. As the years went by, George and Jenny never stopped searching. They kept the billboard up, hoping that someone, somewhere, would come forward with the information they needed. But with each passing year, the reality set in. They were growing older, and their children were becoming harder and harder to find. The case went cold, and the investigation slowly faded from the public consciousness. Yet, despite the lack of new leads, George and Jenny refused to let the case die. They continued to speak about their missing children, to advocate for answers, and to remind the world that they were still searching. The mystery of the Sodder children became a part of their family's identity, and it drove their every waking moment. They refused to accept that the answers would never come, and they were determined to uncover the truth, no matter how long it took. Sadly, as time went on, George and Jenny grew older. They never gave up hope, but the search for the truth became more and more difficult. George passed away in 1969, and Jenny continued to live with the pain of their loss until her own death in 1989. But even in death, the mystery of the 5 missing Sada children remains unsolved. The case continues to intrigue people around the world, with theories and speculation still swirling about what truly happened that Christmas Eve. The Sada family's pursuit of the truth is a testament to the power of love and the enduring nature of hope. Despite the lack of answers, despite the years that passed, George and Jenny never stopped believing that their children were alive, and they never gave up on finding them. In the face of uncertainty, they refused to let go of the truth. And though the answers remain elusive, their search remains a powerful reminder of the lengths to which parents will go for their children, and the deep bond of love that endures even in the face of unimaginable loss. As the years passed and no new evidence emerged, the mystery of the missing Sada children only deepened. George and Jenny Sada never stopped believing their children were alive, but they were left with no answers, only theories. People who followed the case began to speculate on what might have happened to the 5 children that Christmas Eve. While some ideas were grounded in the strange facts of the case, others veered into more chilling and bizarre territory. No theory could fully explain the disappearance, but each one added another layer to the mystery. One of the most widely discussed theories was that the children had been kidnapped before the fire started. This theory was based on several pieces of evidence that didn't align with the official story. First, there was the strange car parked near the house just before the fire broke out. A neighbor had seen it parked on the road for several hours, watching the Sada home, but the identity of the driver was never established. This strange vehicle raised the possibility that someone was lying in wait, perhaps watching the family, and waiting for the right moment to abduct the children. Furthermore, the fact that no remains were found in the wreckage of the house deepened the suspicion that the children had not died in the fire. Human bones are more resilient to fire than most materials, and typically, some trace of remains would survive, even after an intense blaze. Yet there was nothing, no bones, no teeth, not even a piece of clothing. Could it be that the children were taken out of the house before the fire even reached them? And if so, who would want to take them, and why? As time went on, George and Jenny grew more convinced that the fire had been set deliberately, not to destroy the house but to cover up the kidnapping of their children. The fire might have been a planned distraction, a way to cover the abduction and prevent anyone from finding out that the children were taken. The fire department's failure to find any trace of remains in the wreckage seemed to support this theory. If the children had been taken before the fire was set, their disappearance could be linked to someone who knew exactly what they were doing, someone who was prepared to make sure the truth was buried in the ashes. Another theory that gained traction was the possibility that the children were taken by a criminal organization. West Virginia, like many rural areas, was not immune to the influence of organized crime, and some speculated that the children had been abducted to be trafficked. Though there was little concrete evidence to support this, the idea that the children had been taken for some nefarious purpose seemed to explain the strange car and the possible involvement of outsiders. The idea that the fire had been set as a cover-up for an abduction related to a larger criminal operation was unsettling, but it gained some traction as the investigation turned up more dead ends. Others believed that the children's disappearance was the result of a more personal vendetta. Some theories suggested that someone in the community, perhaps someone with a grudge against the Sada family, might have been involved. George had been outspoken in his criticism of local officials and had made enemies in the town, especially after his outspoken views on corruption. Could it be that someone had targeted his family in retaliation for his public criticisms? Could the fire have been an act of revenge, meant to punish George for his defiance? This theory suggested that the fire was a personal attack, not just a random act of violence. And then, there were those who wondered if the children had somehow escaped the fire on their own. Some believed that they might have fled the house in the midst of the blaze, trying to escape the fire. and were either hiding somewhere or taken by someone else. If they had managed to leave the house before the flames overtook their rooms, it would explain why no remains were found. But this theory left many questions unanswered. Where could the children have gone? And if they had escaped, why didn't anyone see them? The lack of any physical evidence made this theory difficult to prove, but it was one of the few that seemed to allow for the possibility of survival. Despite all these theories, none of them could fully explain the mystery of what happened to the 5 Sada children that night. Was it a case of abduction? A tragic accident masked by a deliberate fire? Or something far darker, perhaps involving a criminal network or a personal vendetta? What was clear, however, was that no theory was definitive. The mystery remained unsolved, and the answers remained elusive. Theories continue to swirl, but the truth remains buried in the ashes of the Sada home. Over the years, many people have offered their own opinions, some based on the clues available and others based on sheer speculation. But the Sada family's search for the truth continues, with no definitive answer in sight. What really happened that Christmas Eve in 1945? And where are the 5 missing children? These questions linger, unresolved, in the hearts and minds of those who have followed this haunting case. Nearly 80 years have passed since that fateful Christmas Eve, and the mystery of the missing Sada children still lingers, unresolved. The fire that destroyed the family home in Fayetteville, West Virginia, on December 24, 1945, and the 5 children who vanished without a trace, remain a source of intrigue, confusion, and sorrow. Despite the passage of time, the case continues to captivate the public's imagination, and the questions raised by that night remain unanswered. Over the decades, numerous theories have emerged, each attempting to explain what happened to Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty. Some believe the children were victims of a cruel and deliberate kidnapping, others suggest the fire was set to cover up the abduction, and a few even speculate that the children might have escaped the blaze and been hidden away, possibly taken by someone they knew. But with no solid evidence to confirm any of these theories, the mystery only deepens. George and Jenny's unyielding search for answers kept the case alive for years. The billboard they erected, displaying the photographs of their 5 missing children, became a permanent fixture along Route 16 in Fayetteville, a silent plea for help that would last for decades. Even after George's death in 1969, Jenny continued the search, holding on to the hope that one day, someone would come forward with the truth. But as the years passed and the clues remained scarce, that hope began to fade. Even today, the case of the Sada children is still discussed, analyzed, and debated. The case files remain open, yet the investigation has yielded little more than frustrating dead ends. There are still no definitive answers, no closure for the family, and no resolution to the questions that have haunted them for so long. The lack of remains, the strange sightings, the mysterious car, the cryptic phone calls, these are the pieces of the puzzle that have never quite fit together. Despite all the unanswered questions, one thing remains certain: the disappearance of the 5 Sada children has left a lasting impact on everyone who has followed the case. Their faces, frozen in time on the family's billboard, have become iconic symbols of a mystery that refuses to be solved. For decades, the public has followed the family's search for answers, offering theories and speculation in the hopes of finally uncovering the truth. But the truth has remained elusive, as though it's locked away in some distant corner of the past, waiting to be discovered but never quite coming into focus. As time has passed, the case has become less about finding the children and more about the heartbreaking uncertainty that haunts a family for generations. For George and Jenny, the unanswered questions were a constant presence in their lives. They lived with the knowledge that they would never know the full truth about what happened to their children. And for the rest of the world, the case remains a poignant reminder of how easily a life can be disrupted by tragedy, and how sometimes, no matter how hard we try, we may never uncover the answers we seek. Perhaps, like so many unsolved mysteries, the case of the Sada children will remain shrouded in uncertainty forever. It's a case that has come to symbolize not just the pain of a family's loss, but the frustration of an unanswered question that refuses to fade with time. The Sada family's search for truth was relentless. and while they never found the closure they so desperately sought, their story continues to inspire others who seek answers to mysteries of their own. The disappearance of the Sodder children, the unanswered questions, and the mystery that remains unresolved will always be a haunting reminder of the fragility of life and the darkness that can lurk just beyond our understanding. And as long as the questions remain, the story of the Sodder children will continue to live on, in the minds of those who remember them, and in the hearts of a family who never gave up hope. The case of the Sodder children is one that has haunted the public for decades, a mystery that has remained unsolved for nearly 80 years. The disappearance of 5 young children after a fire on Christmas Eve, 1945, has left more questions than answers. Despite the tireless search by George and Jenny Sodder, the truth about what happened to their children remains as elusive as ever. Was it an abduction, a tragic accident, or something more sinister? The lack of remains, the strange clues, and the unanswered questions continue to stir curiosity, leaving a sense of unease that refuses to fade. The mystery of the Sodder children serves as a reminder of how quickly life can change, how the absence of answers can torment a family, and how some questions simply don't have clear answers. For George and Jenny, the years of searching for their children were filled with hope, heartbreak, and a relentless desire for closure. Though the case has remained cold, their refusal to give up on their children's memory is a testament to the strength of a parent's love. And for all of us who follow the case, it serves as a chilling reminder of how fragile our understanding of the world can be. As we conclude the story of the Sodder children, we are left with more questions than answers, but also with the undeniable impact this mystery has had on all who followed it. The story of the Sodder children will never be forgotten, and perhaps one day, someone will finally uncover the truth. Until then, we are left to wonder, to theorize, and to remember. If you have any thoughts on this case, or if you know anything that could help solve this mystery, we encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about unsolved mysteries, and stay tuned for more in-depth investigations. The truth may be out there, waiting to be discovered. The aftermath of the Christmas Eve fire that devastated the Sodder family home left more than just charred remains and unanswered questions. It was the strange and unsettling inconsistencies, the clues that didn't add up, that would haunt George and Jenny for years to come. As the investigation unfolded, what they uncovered didn't fit the official narrative, and with each passing day, their suspicions grew. One of the most baffling and unsettling pieces of evidence was the absence of any remains. When a house burns down, especially in a fire as intense as the one that ravaged the Sodder home, there are usually remains left behind. Bone fragments, teeth, or even something as small as a piece of clothing can survive the fire. Yet, when investigators combed through the ashes, they found nothing. No remains. Not a single bone. No teeth. Just ashes. The fire had been hot enough to destroy the house entirely, but it didn't make sense that it would consume the bodies of the 5 missing children so completely that not even a trace was left behind. George, who had spent his life working with heavy machinery, knew how devastating fires could be. He was familiar with the way materials burned and how certain things, like bones, could withstand even the most extreme heat. Yet, despite the ferocity of the fire, there were no remains of his children, and that alone raised alarm bells. This single fact was enough to make him question the theory that the children had died in the fire. Could it be that they had escaped before the flames took hold? Adding to the confusion was the fact that the fire had burned in such a specific way. The blaze started on the ground floor of the house, and quickly spread to the upper levels. But when the fire was extinguished, the children's bedrooms, located on the 2nd floor, were destroyed. And yet, no remains were found in the debris. The fire had left the house in ruins, but surely something, some small fragment of evidence, should have remained, even if the children themselves had been inside at the time. The fact that there were no remains left George and Jenny with only one conclusion: their children couldn't have been inside when the fire started. But if they weren't inside, where were they? One of the earliest pieces of evidence that fueled George's suspicions came from a neighbor. Just before the fire, the neighbor reported seeing a car parked near the Sodder home. The car had been parked for several hours, and the neighbor noticed that it seemed to be watching the house. When the fire broke out, the car was gone, but the neighbor couldn't identify the driver or offer any details about the vehicle. This was odd, especially considering how quickly the fire spread. If someone had been watching the house, could they have known the best time to start the fire and take the children? Then there was the issue of the front door. George was adamant that the door was not locked when he attempted to re-enter the house to rescue his children. When the fire started, he rushed to the door to get back inside, but he found it locked from the inside. This struck him as strange. The Sauter family had never locked the front door at night, never. So why was it locked when the fire started? Could someone have locked the door to keep the children inside? Or, more chillingly, was someone already in the house before the fire started, blocking their escape? The fire department, while conducting their investigation, didn't seem to address these inconsistencies. Their conclusion was that the children had perished in the fire, but there was no real explanation for the lack of remains. No one could explain how a fire could burn so hot without leaving any trace of the victims. The official narrative was that the children had died in the blaze. But George and Jenny weren't satisfied with that conclusion. They couldn't accept that their children were simply gone without a trace, without any proof that they had perished in the fire. They believed their children were alive, somewhere, hidden away from the world. Over the following weeks, George began to investigate on his own, searching for answers wherever he could find them. He hired private detectives and consulted with anyone who might have information about the fire. The more he looked, the more he uncovered disturbing clues that seemed to point to something far more sinister. The first of these clues came from an unexpected source, a strange phone call that had been made to the Sauter home just hours before the fire started. Jenny received a phone call from a man with a thick accent. The caller asked her about the children, about their whereabouts, and about the family's plans for the holidays. The call was short and unsettling, and Jenny couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Was the call connected to the fire? And if so, who was the mysterious caller, and why were they asking about the family? It wasn't the first time the Sauters had received odd calls, but it was the most unusual one. Could it have been a warning? Or was it a sign that someone had been watching the family in the days leading up to the fire? As George and Jenny continued to dig deeper, they began to uncover even more strange pieces of the puzzle. Witnesses claimed to have seen the children in the days following the fire. Some reported seeing them in nearby towns, others claimed they had been seen in the company of strangers. The stories varied, but they all pointed to one thing: the children might still be alive. If they had survived the fire, then where had they gone? Were they hiding? Had they been taken by someone who knew exactly what to do to cover up their disappearance? With the mounting inconsistencies, George and Jenny became convinced that the fire had been set deliberately, to cover up the kidnapping of their children. Theories began to emerge, some more outlandish than others, but one thing was clear: the children had not died in the fire. They had been taken. But who would do such a thing? And why? The possibilities seemed endless. Was there someone in the community who had a grudge against the Sauter family? Could someone have planned the fire to eliminate the children as witnesses? Or was it something more bizarre, a criminal organization that had been operating in the area, kidnapping children for some nefarious purpose? Whatever the truth was, it was clear that the fire wasn't an accident. The children had disappeared, and the evidence surrounding the fire only deepened the mystery. As weeks passed and the fire that consumed the Sauter home became a distant memory for many, George and Jenny could not let go of the questions that haunted them. They refused to believe the official story that their 5 children had died in the fire. Every lead, every clue, no matter how faint, pushed them further in their search for answers. The feeling that something was being hidden, that their children might still be out there, kept them on a relentless pursuit. They didn't just want closure, they needed to understand what had truly happened. George, who had spent years working in construction and dealing with heavy machinery, was no stranger to the workings of fire. He knew that human bones could survive even the most intense fires. The absence of remains in the rubble of their home only raised more questions in his mind. Why had there been no traces of the children? Why had the fire burned so hot, yet left nothing behind? Was it possible that his children had escaped the fire, or worse, been taken before the flames had even reached their rooms? George and Jenny began their own investigation, questioning neighbors, visiting local authorities, and seeking out anyone who might have information. They dug through the ashes of their destroyed home every day, hoping to find even a single clue that could lead them to their children. But with no remains and no clear answers from the fire department or law enforcement, their frustrations grew. It wasn't long before they began receiving strange phone calls, letters, and tips from anonymous sources, some of which seemed to point to something far more sinister. One tipster claimed to have seen the children after the fire, walking down the road unscathed. Others suggested they had been seen being driven away in a car, possibly by someone they didn't know. Despite the lack of concrete evidence, George and Jenny began to believe that their children hadn't died in the fire, they had been taken. Over time, these new theories began to form. Some speculated that the fire had been intentionally set to cover up the abduction of the children. Others believed that someone in the community might have been involved. Could it be that the Sodder children were kidnapped by a criminal group? Or was there a more personal motive behind the disappearance? Each new theory seemed to lead to more questions than answers, but for George and Jenny, they kept searching for the truth, no matter how dark or convoluted the path seemed. One of the most convincing theories that emerged was that someone had deliberately set the fire to cover up the kidnapping. George and Jenny began to wonder if the fire had been orchestrated by someone who knew their family's routine, someone who might have been watching them in the days leading up to Christmas. There were witnesses who claimed to have seen a strange car parked near the house before the fire started, and the presence of an unfamiliar vehicle only seemed to add weight to this theory. Why would anyone want to set their home on fire, and why would they target their children? Could it be that a neighbor, or someone with a personal grudge, had planned the fire? Were the children taken to keep them from revealing something that only they knew? George and Jenny were not about to let this theory fade. They kept pushing for more answers, contacting private investigators, and reaching out to people who might know something about the fire or the missing children. Another theory that gained traction was that the children had been abducted by a criminal organization. This idea came from a local theory that children were being taken to be trafficked, perhaps by a network operating in the area. It seemed far-fetched, but the more George and Jenny considered it, the more it made sense. The strange men with thick accents who had called their house in the weeks before the fire, was it possible they were connected to some kind of criminal activity? Could their children have been taken as part of something bigger, something George and Jenny had no idea about? Despite the constant flow of tips, letters, and strange occurrences, nothing ever led to a definitive answer. As years went by, the case went cold. The search for the 5 missing children remained open, but no new evidence ever came to light. The Sodder family's billboard remained up, displaying the children's photographs and begging for any information that could help solve the case. Yet, the more they searched, the more elusive the answers became. With each passing year, George and Jenny grew older, but their determination never wavered. They refused to accept that their children had died in the fire, not without proof. They held on to the hope that one day, they would discover the truth. The family's relentless pursuit of answers became a symbol of hope for those who had lost loved ones, for people who, like the Sodders, believed that no mystery was too dark to uncover. And while no concrete evidence ever surfaced, the case remained a haunting reminder of how elusive the truth can be when it's buried beneath layers of uncertainty and half-truths. As we reflect on the theories surrounding the disappearance of the Sodder children, we can't help but feel the weight of their unanswered questions. Whether the fire was set deliberately, whether the children were taken, or whether it was all a tragic accident that no one can fully explain, we are left with a sense of deep sadness. The absence of closure is a torment for any family, and the Sodders never got the answers they so desperately needed. To this day, the mystery remains unsolved. Was it an abduction? Was it a cover-up? Or was it something even darker? No one knows for sure. The disappearance of the Sodder children continues to be one of the most chilling and perplexing cases in American history, a case where the truth is still hidden, buried in the ashes of a destroyed home, behind a veil of unanswered questions. Theories may come and go, but the mystery of the 5 missing children endures. The mystery surrounding the disappearance of the 5 Sada children didn't just captivate their family. It captured the attention of the entire nation. As the days turned to weeks, and the weeks turned to years, the case of the missing children became one of the most talked about true crime stories of the 1940s. The strange circumstances surrounding the fire, the lack of remains, the unsettling clues, and the unanswered questions all combined to create a case that would haunt the American public for decades. George and Jenny's relentless pursuit of answers sparked widespread media interest. The more the family refused to accept the official explanation that their children had perished in the fire, the more public interest grew. Newspapers around the country picked up the story, and for years, articles appeared with headlines like 5 children missing after Christmas Eve fire, and Sada family seeks justice for missing kids. But despite the media coverage, no new leads materialized. Still, the public's fascination with the case only deepened, with each passing year bringing new theories and questions to the surface. One of the most remarkable things about the Sada case was how it gripped people's imaginations. For many, the idea of children being taken right under the noses of their parents was terrifying, and the thought that they could vanish in the middle of the night, leaving no trace behind, made the case all the more chilling. The bizarre details, such as the locked door, the unidentifiable car seen near the house, and the odd phone calls, kept people talking, debating, and theorizing about what had really happened that Christmas Eve. George and Jenny, of course, didn't stop there. They took matters into their own hands, launching their own investigation into the case. They put up a billboard along a busy highway, one that prominently displayed photographs of their 5 missing children. The billboard became a beacon for anyone with information, and in some ways, it kept the case alive in the public's mind. For George and Jenny, the billboard was a constant reminder that their children had not been forgotten, and they weren't about to give up searching for them. Over time, tips and leads began to trickle in. People from all over the country sent letters, and some even made phone calls claiming to have seen the children after the fire. These stories were never fully verified, but they added a sense of hope that the children might still be alive. Some witnesses reported seeing the children in nearby towns, or even further away, with people who didn't seem familiar to them. Others described seeing the children in the company of strangers, or being taken in a car. These sightings, though unproven, kept the mystery of the Sada children alive in the public consciousness, and they fueled the belief that the children had somehow survived and were being hidden away. The fascination with the case wasn't just confined to local newspapers or small-town gossip. The story of the Sada family's heartbreak and their tireless search for answers spread across the nation. It became a story of perseverance, of a family refusing to accept the official explanation and continuing to fight for the truth. In an era before social media, the case generated discussion in living rooms, at coffee shops, and in the halls of government. People around the country became invested in the mystery, trying to solve it from afar, speculating on what had happened to the children, and why no one seemed to have the answers. Media outlets began to explore the darker possibilities, including the idea that the children had been abducted. The notion that a family could be targeted in such a personal and horrific way resonated with people, and it sparked debates about the safety of children and the lengths to which someone might go to cover up a crime. Was it a kidnapping, as some believed? Could someone have deliberately set the fire to cover their tracks? Was the family being watched? The more questions that arose, the more the public became obsessed with solving the mystery of the missing Sada children. Even after the case went cold, the story remained in the public eye. The images of the Sada children, their young faces frozen in time, continued to appear in articles, television programs, and even in documentaries about unsolved mysteries. Their names became synonymous with unanswered questions, and the Sada family's quest for justice remained a poignant symbol of a family's enduring love and determination. The case also highlighted the emotional toll of unresolved mysteries. For George and Jenny, the years that followed the fire were filled with grief, hope, and frustration. As they grew older, the pain of losing their children only deepened, and the weight of uncertainty took its toll. Yet, despite their aging and the passing of time, they refused to stop looking for answers. Their journey became a testament to the human spirit's resilience in the face of the unknown. Eventually, the story of the Sada children's disappearance was overshadowed by new tragedies, new mysteries, and new cases that required public attention. But the case of the 5 missing children from West Virginia remained a haunting reminder of how easily families can be torn apart, and how deeply the truth can be buried in a web of inconsistencies and unanswered questions. To this day, the mystery of the Sada children's disappearance continues to intrigue those who study unsolved crimes. Their faces are still displayed on websites, in books, and on documentaries, as a symbol of a family's unrelenting search for truth. Theories continue to swirl. Some believe the children were kidnapped, others think the fire was an accident, and some still suspect foul play. But what remains certain is that no one truly knows what happened that Christmas Eve. And the public's fascination with this case, which has never waned, continues to keep the mystery alive. While the years passed, and the case of the missing Sada children began to fade from the headlines, George and Jenny Sada never stopped searching. In their hearts, the mystery of their children's disappearance was far from over. They knew the official story was incomplete, and they were determined to uncover the truth. What happened on that Christmas Eve in 1945? Where were their children? And why had the fire seemed to destroy everything but the answers they so desperately sought? George, a hard-working, self-made man, refused to accept that his children had died in the fire, despite the official investigation's conclusion. He knew the fire had been intense, but no one had ever satisfactorily explained the complete absence of remains in the wreckage. Bone fragments, teeth, or any signs of life should have remained, but there was nothing. This glaring inconsistency was enough to convince him that the fire had not killed his children. They had to have survived. They had to have been taken. Determined to find answers, George embarked on his own investigation, starting with the wreckage of the house. Every day, he would visit the site, searching for any scrap of evidence that might have been missed. As we reflect on this case, we are reminded of the limitations of our understanding. Sometimes, no matter how much we search for answers, the truth remains just beyond our reach. Elisa Lam's death challenges us to confront the harsh reality that not all questions can be answered, and not all mysteries can be solved. But there's something almost comforting in that, isn't there? In a world where everything often seems so predictable, where every twist and turn can be anticipated, the unknown still holds its power. And while the mystery of Elisa Lam's death may never be fully unraveled, it invites us to reflect on the fragility of life and the complexity of the human experience. Elisa Lam was more than just a mystery. She was a young woman with dreams, struggles, and aspirations. Through her blog and online presence, she shared glimpses of her life, her hopes, her fears, her battles with mental health. Elisa wasn't just a victim of a tragic event. She was a person, a daughter, a sister, someone who was navigating the ups and downs of life just like the rest of us. And perhaps that is what makes her story so profoundly haunting. We are reminded of how quickly life can change, how easily things can slip from our grasp, and how the mysteries we face don't always have easy answers. While we may never know exactly what happened to Elisa Lam, we can still reflect on her life and the impact her story has had. Her death has become a symbol of both the unresolved and the unknowable. It serves as a reminder that some mysteries cannot be solved, and some questions will never be answered. And maybe that's okay. At the heart of this story is a simple truth: we are all connected, in ways we may not always understand. Elisa Lam's journey, her disappearance, and her tragic end touched many lives. It sparked conversations about mental health, the mysteries of human behavior, and the eerie things that can happen when we least expect them. But in the end, the most important thing we can take from this story is the reminder that life is fragile. We never know what's around the corner, and sometimes, the questions we ask will remain unanswered. Elisa Lam may never have known how deeply her story would resonate. But it does. And that, in itself, is a testament to her lasting impact, even in death. We can only hope that, in some way, her story brings us closer to understanding the complexities of life. even as we continue to search for answers. Story 2. On Christmas Eve, 1945, the lives of the Sauter family were changed forever. It began like any other Christmas night: gifts under the tree, the warmth of family, and the excitement that only the holiday season can bring. But by morning, what was once a picture-perfect family would be left broken, forever changed by a fire that claimed their home, but left behind a chilling mystery. 5 children vanished without a trace, and what happened that night has haunted their parents, the community, and the world for over 7 decades. It was just after midnight when the fire broke out. The Sauter family, living in their home in Fayetteville, West Virginia, was fast asleep. The fire was sudden, spreading quickly through the house. George and Jenny Sauter, the parents of 10 children, were able to escape with their 4 younger children, but the 5 older children, who had been in the upstairs bedrooms, seemed to be trapped. As flames engulfed the house, George and Jenny feared the worst. Firefighters arrived too late to do anything, and when the fire was finally extinguished, they found nothing: no bodies, no remains, just the charred remains of what was once their home. At first, they assumed that the 5 older children, Maurice, 14, Martha, 12, Louis, 9, Jenny, 8, and Betty, 5, had perished in the flames. But as days turned into weeks, and as the family began to mourn their loss, something didn't sit right with George and Jenny. The investigation into the fire had been swift, and the official report claimed that the children had died in the blaze. But George and Jenny were not so sure. After all, if their children had died in the fire, why were there no remains? Fire, of course, could be intense, but the fire that destroyed their home had not been hot enough to reduce human bodies to nothing. The lack of remains, the absence of any traces, was perplexing. Could it be that the children had somehow escaped the fire? Were they hiding somewhere, or had someone taken them in the confusion of the flames? George and Jenny began to question the official story. They would not believe that their children had died without a trace, without even a single bone or piece of clothing left behind. They began to investigate on their own, following every lead, piecing together what little evidence they had. But the mystery only deepened. They learned that there had been strange things happening in the days leading up to the fire. They had received odd phone calls from men with thick accents who spoke in a language that seemed foreign to them. And in the days before Christmas, they had seen a strange car parked outside their home, a car that no one seemed to recognize. Were these just coincidences? Or were they signs pointing to something far more sinister? As they delved deeper, they uncovered even more unsettling clues. Witnesses claimed to have seen the 5 children after the fire, walking down the road, unscathed, as if they had been taken from the house before the flames reached their rooms. Some claimed to have seen the children in a car, driven away by a stranger. Yet, no one could explain how they had escaped the fire or who had taken them. George and Jenny knew that something was wrong. If their children had somehow survived, then they had to have been taken before the fire spread. But by whom? And why? Why would anyone abduct 5 children from a home, leaving behind no trace, no sign of struggle? As they continued to search for answers, they grew increasingly frustrated with the local authorities, who seemed too quick to write off the case as a tragic accident. They believed there was more to the story than met the eye, and they wouldn't rest until they found out what happened to their children. George and Jenny put up a billboard on the side of the road, featuring the pictures of their 5 missing children. They hired private investigators and even received tips from people claiming to have seen the children. Some said they were spotted in nearby towns, others believed they had been kidnapped by a criminal ring operating in the area. The theories were many, but the answers remained elusive. And as the years passed, the hope that their children were still alive slowly faded. But still, the mystery persists. Despite the passage of time, the case remains unsolved. The Sauter children have never been found, and the questions surrounding their disappearance have never been answered. Where did they go? Why didn't the fire take their lives? Were they kidnapped, or did they escape on their own? And if they did escape, how did they get out of the house without leaving any sign of their movements? What happened that night, and why has it remained such a haunting enigma? The vanishing of the Sauter children is one of the most perplexing and tragic mysteries in American history. It is a case that raises more questions than answers, and the lack of closure for George and Jenny is something that still resonates with people today. As we delve deeper into this story, we'll examine the facts, the theories, and the haunting unanswered questions that continue to surround this tragic event. But more than that, we'll remember the children who disappeared without a trace, the parents who never gave up hope, and the mystery that has haunted them for over 70 years. The Sauter family, living in the quiet town of Fayetteville, West Virginia, were a hardworking and tight-knit family, typical of many American households in the mid-20th century. George Sauter, a successful businessman, and his wife Jenny had 10 children, ranging in age from infants to young adults. The family had immigrated from Italy in the early 1900s, and they built a life for themselves in a modest home that George had worked hard to provide. They were proud of their accomplishments, and their children were seen as bright, promising, and full of potential. Fayetteville, a small rural town, was the kind of place where everyone knew each other. It was peaceful, where neighbors would wave as they passed by and families would gather for holidays and celebrations. The Sauter household was no different. Their children, all 10 of them, grew up in an environment of love and encouragement. George and Jenny were determined to give their children opportunities they didn't have as immigrants. They believed in the value of hard work and education, instilling those principles in their children from a young age. George had established a thriving trucking business, while Jenny took care of the household. Their home was a lively place, filled with the energy of young children and the sounds of family life. The 5 oldest children, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, were active and responsible, helping around the house and contributing to the family's success in their own ways. They were well loved in the community, admired for their hardworking, family-oriented values. The Sauter family's life was a picture of stability, but it wasn't without its challenges. George, having come to America from Italy, often faced prejudice and discrimination, but he never let it hold him back. He worked hard to build his business, and by all accounts, he was a self-made man. He had a reputation for being a determined and honest businessman, respected by those who knew him. Jenny, a devoted mother, supported George in his endeavors, while also raising their children with love, care, and a firm belief in their potential. Though their life seemed typical and wholesome, there were underlying tensions that began to emerge in the years leading up to the fire. George's outspoken views on local politics and his opposition to the influence of certain figures in the community had caused friction. He had a few heated disagreements with local officials and was vocal about his views on corruption and the treatment of immigrants. While George and Jenny were well liked by most, their outspoken nature and willingness to challenge the status quo made them targets for some. It was clear that the family's success and George's opinions had made them both admired and, to some, a little too unconventional. Despite these tensions, the Sauter family remained strong. Their home was a symbol of the American dream, a place where hard work and determination paid off. They had everything that many would consider essential: a home, a business, a loving family. They were well respected, and their lives were an embodiment of what many hoped to achieve. The children were healthy and full of promise, with bright futures ahead of them. They had every reason to be optimistic about the years to come, and the family's future seemed assured. But on Christmas Eve, 1945, everything changed. A fire, which would become the catalyst for a mystery that has yet to be solved, tore through their home in the middle of the night. 5 of their children, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, were never seen again. The lives of George and Jenny, as well as the entire town of Fayetteville, were shattered. What had been a happy, prosperous family was now divided by tragedy, uncertainty, and the agonizing questions that would linger for the rest of their lives. Christmas Eve, 1945, started like any other night in the Sauter household. The children were excited, their faces lit up by the Christmas tree and the promise of presents to come. The evening was filled with warmth, laughter, and the sound of holiday cheer, a time for families to come together and celebrate. The Sauter family, tucked into their home in Fayetteville, West Virginia, had no reason to believe that this night would be anything but joyful. But as the clock struck midnight, their lives would change forever, and a fire would tear through their home, shattering their perfect holiday. According to the fire's timeline, the blaze began in the late hours of the night. It started on the ground floor of the solder house, but the exact cause remains unclear to this day. George and Jenny were asleep when the fire broke out. The crackling sounds of the flames and the smell of smoke woke them in the early hours of December 25th. George immediately jumped from bed, rushing to the room where his younger children were sleeping. Jenny followed close behind. In a panic, they screamed for their older children, but the house was already filled with thick smoke, and the fire had spread far too quickly. George and Jenny managed to get out of the house with 4 of their younger children, but the 5 older children, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, were still in their bedrooms, seemingly trapped. George tried to rush back inside to save them, but the flames were too intense, and the front door was blocked by debris. The house was burning too quickly for him to get to them. The smoke was suffocating, and the heat was unbearable. He could hear his children's voices calling out, but they were lost in the growing roar of the fire. He had no choice but to flee with the younger children. Outside, George and Jenny were frantic. They could only watch as their home, the place where they had raised their children, was consumed by flames. The fire department was called, but by the time they arrived, it was too late. The house had burned to the ground. Firefighters could do little more than try to contain the blaze, but they were too late to save anything. In the ashes, there was nothing left but charred wood, twisted metal, and the remnants of what had once been a happy home. The fire was a devastating loss, but the real mystery began when the firefighters and investigators combed through the wreckage. There was no sign of the 5 older children. Their rooms had been completely destroyed, and no remains were found in the ashes. The fire had burned so intensely that it was expected there would be some remains, even if they were just bones. But nothing. No clothing, no personal items, and no signs of life had been left behind. At first, investigators believed the children had perished in the fire, but as George and Jenny processed the loss, they couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The lack of remains was odd, and the fact that no bones had been found despite the intensity of the fire was highly unusual. George was a practical man, and he knew that human bones would remain after a fire, even if the body was consumed by the flames. Yet, there were no remains. Not a single bone. Nothing. George and Jenny began to question the official story. They believed the children had escaped the fire. They had heard rumors from neighbors and passers-by about seeing the children moments before the fire broke out. Some claimed they had seen the children playing outside near the road. Others said they had seen them running toward a car just before the flames consumed the house. But the authorities were dismissive of these theories. They insisted the children had perished in the blaze, that there was no evidence to suggest otherwise. Despite the investigators' conclusion, George refused to accept the possibility that his children had simply died in the fire. He knew his children. They were smart, resourceful, and brave. They wouldn't have just died in the blaze without trying to escape. And so, he began his own investigation into what had really happened. He visited the site of the fire every day, searching for anything that might explain why his children's remains had never been found. He combed through the wreckage, but nothing explained the strange disappearance of his children. Then came the first unsettling clue that would send George down a new path. A neighbor who lived nearby had seen a car parked on the road near the solder house just before the fire started. The car had been parked there for several hours, and the neighbor had noticed that the driver seemed to be watching the house. George asked around, but no one seemed to recognize the car. The strange man in the car became the first of many oddities surrounding the fire. In the weeks that followed, George continued his search for answers. He hired private investigators, contacted reporters, and even put up a billboard with his children's photographs. The billboard became a beacon for anyone who might have information about the fire or the missing children. The more he looked, the more bizarre the case became. Theories began to emerge about the possibility of kidnapping. Some suggested that the fire had been set deliberately to cover up the abduction of his children. Could it be that the children were taken before the fire spread? If so, who would want to take them? And why would anyone target the Sauter family in such a brutal way? As George and Jenny delved deeper into the mystery, they uncovered even more disturbing clues. They received anonymous phone calls and letters with cryptic messages, and they were told by witnesses that they had seen the children in towns miles away from Fayetteville in the days after the fire. Some claimed to have seen them in a car with strange men, while others said they had been taken by people they didn't recognize. But with no concrete evidence, and no leads to follow, the case began to fade from the public eye. Despite the passage of time, the Sauter family never stopped searching. They remained determined to find out what happened to their children, refusing to believe that they had simply vanished in the fire. And for years, they held on to the hope that one day, the truth would be revealed. But the mystery of the Sauter children's disappearance remains unsolved to this day.